At that time, I was part of the faculty, a group of senior officers from different forces in the United States who came together to work for a week with other senior officers who were vying for promotion. I arrived at the base about 6 or 7 miles from the center of Washington, almost at midnight, and the bar was about to close. However, the barman was good enough to offer me a whiskey. And as I had this lovely malt, only one other person at the bar came up to me.
It was pretty obvious by his accent that he was Scottish. And so I opened a conversation with him by saying, "I love Scotland." And he, of course, responded, and being the very congenial Andy Lothian, we engaged in a conversation. And we discovered that both of us were there for the same purpose. That is, the course that was being conducted on the Walter Reed campus. In the course of the conversation, it became known to Andy that I play the pipes, and I think that solidified the relationship. And we talked of things, Scotland, and we talked of other things, and we finished our whiskeys and bid each other good night. That was how we met.
So the next day, I discovered that Casey was one of the delegates in my class.
The course had already begun, and we were all in session, and we got an announcement that something had happened. The initial stories were confused, and we were told only that an airplane had flown into one of the Twin Towers, Trade Center towers. And in the initial confusion, it was unclear if it was a small private airplane that had simply gone off course or been blown off course, or something else. But of course, we retired from the course at that moment and tried to find a news outlet. We did find a television, and of course, the news was all over the television. And by the time we did get to a news source, a second airplane had struck the other tower, and it was clear that it was not an accidental incident. So we stayed at the news outlet, and not much later, a third plane struck not so far from us, hitting the Pentagon, and Walter Reed campus is a matter of miles from the Pentagon, so near to where we were. At that point, those of us that could potentially help all went to the hospital to offer our services. And Andy and I met later that day, at which point I was rather dubious about the appropriateness of opening a session with the pipes given the events that had transpired. But Andy was not at all dubious and was very convinced that it would be a good thing to do. And he persuaded me to open the session the next day with the pipes.
The next day, the cohort of colonels and generals, of which Casey was one, arrived at the classroom, and I asked the group to stand, which they did, and announced Colonel Casey Jones. The rear of the training room opened, and Casey came in with his bagpipes, and you played Amazing Grace. And the healing was instant in that room. And these officers, in particular, many of them surgeon commanders, who've given their life not just to the military or any of the services, but also given their lives to save lives and to heal. And that moment of healing for them was immense. Within 10 seconds of hearing the first strains of Amazing Grace, they were weeping, holding one another. And for 3.5 minutes, Casey played Amazing Grace. I've never heard it played as beautifully before, and I never will ever hear it played as beautifully again.
Some things occur to me. The first is that playing Amazing Grace on the bagpipes has become iconic of memorializing the victims of 9/11. But it further occurs to me that that might very well have been the first time in a setting before a group that Amazing Grace had been played on the pipes to commemorate those fallen.
And the healing began.